Aloha kako. Love to us all. So, first of all, the boat came to me, yeah? I didn't go looking for it. It sailed right into my home port. And they said, do you know anybody who wants to do this? But from teenage time, I already was quite concerned about nuclear weapons and war. And you know, I was asked to make a little quote for the blurb for our little talk out, our little festival out there. And somebody edited a little bit, which probably made it better. This small sailing vessel opens the door to dialogue to help us break out of patterns of hopelessness. To help us stop thinking it is normal to live under threat of arms, that it's okay to threaten other countries in the name of our nation. This vessel allows us to question the thinking that because something has been so all our lives, that nothing can be done to change it. Big results begin with small, continued efforts. So, a lot of the hard part, several people asked me today about, let's look across the ocean. That's the fun part. It can be cold, wet, bumpy, and fun. Not everybody will agree that it was fun, but some of us are funny that way. But the hard part is the same hard part why Russia and the United States can't get rid of their nuclear weapons so easily. The hard part is the human part, the interpersonal reaction. Several times along the way in our planning committee meetings and our dialogues while we're working, I've said, and it's almost become cliche, we cannot have a mini war in our peace movement. It's a bad example. Cannot be telling the USSR and the United States, you guys gotta settle your differences. When, I think Christianity has that thing about pointing out the splinter in their neighbor's eye while they have a log in their own eye. So we gotta watch out for that. When I flew over here to once again captain the Golden Rule, which I consider, I don't want to say I consider it a great honor or privilege. It's more like it's an entrustment, and I appreciate it. So on the plane coming from Hawaii, I reread the whole Albert Bigelow book, The Voyage of the Golden Rule, which is subtitled An Experiment with Truth. And these guys didn't have all the answers. They had moral certitude, they were kind of sure they were doing the right thing, but they weren't so arrogant as to know that they were doing it the best possible way all the time. And they try to keep that firmly in mind. So there was one part, Commander Bigelow is called Commander Bigelow because he was a Navy officer. And I can't speak to the military side. Not only am I not a veteran, I'm not a member of Veterans for Peace, although I strongly support most of their aims. But I am a mariner, and a professional mariner is maybe the second or third oldest profession on the watery face of our planet. And so it's a tough one because Commander Bigelow talked about order and discipline and freedom. And he became a Quaker. And so Quaker practiced pacifism, but I think you'll back me up on this, they also practice super consensus, more than consensus. And so that's frustrating for organizers ashore, waiting for an answer. Do you want to host our event or something like that? Because everybody has to agree. They don't, as he put it, Quakers don't gather up votes and make majorities and minorities, and they feel like if there's one or two people in the room who have been left out and outvoted, that's not a good outcome already. So he said there's an inherent conflict at sea where, as he was taught as a naval officer, there's one captain and their word is final. Whereas in a Quaker meeting, which was his other world, it's, you know, you gotta get the complete consensus. And so it was a constant struggle, and he philosophized a little bit about it. He said, probably discipline or command is inherently violence-based, you know, do it or else kind of thing. And he said, the opposite of that is freedom. And so how do you reconcile those things? He said, well, maybe it's acceptable if you voluntarily say, I agree to be part of this. Yeah, I'll join this ship and we'll follow the captain. So there you can have a way to preserve the freedom while still keeping the order. So I think in Veterans for Peace, there's a different view of the military tradition of chain of command and following orders, because our best examples in Veterans for Peace are the ones who said, no, I'm not following that order. Yeah, Jerry here said, no, I'm going to Sweden, you know, I'm going to tell other people don't go, you know, that's not following orders. And I had the delight of meeting Veterans for Peace National Board member Susan Schall. So I looked up her thing, and she was a nurse lieutenant in the military, and she leaflet bombed from an airplane a military base and an aircraft carrier with 10,000 leaflets during the Vietnam War, encouraging service people to not go do this. Still, I think, I haven't had the chance to talk to these people, but I think much of the time they saw reason and value in having a structure and reasons for having certain guidelines and following them. So it's not an all or nothing thing. You have to, on a daily basis, think about what's right with your conscience and how you can advance your aims without stepping on somebody else's, or, you know, just being a hardliner about something just for the heck of it. And when is it important to say something, and when is it just important to go along with it? I think Gandhi said something like, when an injustice is just part of the friction of the machine of government, just let it go and go with it. But when an injustice is oppressing somebody else, say, no, I'm not going to do that, even if it means you go to jail or something like that. So, I had a good talk with a captain friend of mine who teaches captain license courses. And so legally, the captain is responsible for the vessel and all the people in her. And that's what Commander Bigelow was wrestling with going across the ocean. So if you have somebody, whether it's because they're used to another structure, consensus-based, or they just are used to, you know, being the one in charge, or disagree with, and they say, I'm not gonna do that, then what do you do, yeah? So I think this is all the same stuff that nations have to wrestle with to come around to signing the treaty and getting rid of their weapons. So it's a valuable mini lesson, and it's good practice. And thank you for inviting me to this. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. I will let you.
Well, I just wondered about the Cuba portion of the
Oh,
trip.
I love the Cuba portion.
I had an opportunity to do photographs in Havana for about 3 or 4 months. It put me in a lot of jeopardy with the government. I got a letter from the Treasury Department saying I'd go to jail for 10 years. And I know that recently the administration hasn't really helped repair its relations with Cuba, as far as I can tell.
I've seen signs in both directions of that.
Yeah.
So, let's start, sorry to do it in this order, but let's start with the negative and go to the positive. So shortly after, let's start with the positive. We're gonna go, they're saying, we're sailing there and part of our group is flying there. Oh, okay, so I've heard about in the past, so they gotta like, make sure their passport doesn't get stamped, they're gonna go through Mexico or Canada or, and they're like, no, there's JetBlue and there's United Airlines and there's Southwest and there's American Airlines, all serving Cuba every day. Yeah? I'm like, really? Okay, how do you do that? Well, the same way we're gonna do it, legally. And with a people-to-people cultural exchange group. We found an area of agreement between the Cuban government and the American government that it's a bad idea to have Americans walking around Cuba with nothing to do. So you have to go on an itinerary where you have something scheduled every day. So off we go, right? Maybe that's the good part. That came in under President Obama's administration. And when he said, we're opening up relations with Cuba, we're gonna get rid of this economic penalties for visiting under this format. And people reacted to it and stifled and shut them down, and the next administration reversed or made worse policies. I'm only a minor political observer, but I suspect that what President Biden's doing is opening up without saying that he's opening up, and just letting people go, and more people will go and see for themselves, and more people will want to go, and it'll be hard to say you can't go. Stop.
I can add a little to that.
Yes.
Yeah, because so Obama did loosen things up a little bit. Trump put it right back on. For the most part, Biden has done nothing to reverse Trump's additional, like 200 additional
That's my bad news part.
sanctions. But the travel is easier, has become easier, and I think that actually so that's a good sign, and that did happen under Biden. Restored, I think, the Obama era easier traveling, and we were surprised how relatively easy it was. We didn't even have to apply for a special license from the Treasury Department, which is usually had been the case in the past. We were able to travel under a general license that was kind of universal for everybody, as long as you kept certain requirements. And one of those requirements Kiko mentioned was that we're part of a certified, organized educational experience in Cuba. We actually have to provide the daily itinerary, or be prepared to provide it. So we went with a group called Proximity Cuba that organizes trips like this for Code Pink and other groups, and they did a fantastic job. We went under they were already planning this arts and culture program, so we participated in an arts and culture program, which, Cuban arts and culture is amazing. So we were very, very happy with that. And then they made a few special considerations for Veterans for Peace and the Golden Rule, and we had a nice big press conference and got a lot of media coverage, and went to Pinar del Rio to visit the county, or the area that had been hit hardest by the hurricane last September, October. We had a terrific experience, and then when we came back, so Kiko was the captain. We sailed from Key West to Marina Hemingway in about 24 hours, and left one morning, arrived this beautiful morning into Cuba, and then we sailed 2 days back because we went farther. We went back to Miami. It was about 2 days, 2 nights out, and went very well. And we were kind of braced. I was certainly bracing for a little bit of harassment or a little bit of a harsh inspection when we got back, and it was really kind of peculiar because they never boarded our boat. In fact, they conducted their interview and inspection on Zoom. Believe it or not, on phone. Well, first of all, by phone. And the guy who we talked with, we were interfacing with, was really friendly, joking with us. Nobody ever even asked what we were doing in Cuba. And nobody came on the boat to grab all our cigars and our rum. So we were really happy about that. And yeah, so that was surprisingly easy. It can be done, and it's not. I'm not going to get that letter threatening me with 10 years in prison that you got.
Jerry, could you mention yesterday, excuse me, Kiko, Captain Kiko, yesterday we had the 2 ambassadors of
Oh,
Cuba visit the boat. And could you just
Yeah, the
maybe
U.S. I
talk about
forgot to
what-
mention the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations and the first secretary and another aide came to visit the Golden Rule yesterday, and we had a really nice discussion on the boat. And actually, Anthony videotaped some of that, and you know, so why did we go to Cuba in the first place? Well, in 1962, most of you here remember that we almost had a world nuclear war over the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis, hostility of the U.S. towards Cuba, and hostility and mistrust between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And of course, the U.S. had placed its nuclear missiles in Turkey, near Russia. The Soviet Union convinced Cuba to place their missiles there. So anyway, we almost had a nuclear war. And so it made a lot of sense when we were that close to Cuba for us to make that trip. And we're very happy we did, but we're very concerned that all these years later, 60-some years later, U.S. still has this very mean-spirited, hostile, aggressive policy towards the Cuban Revolution, and the Cuban people are suffering the consequences. And right now, they really are hurting in Cuba. And a lot of the young people, this is the most tragic thing, a lot of young people in Cuba are leaving because the economic situation is dire enough that they just don't have a lot of hope for their future. So they're leaving Cuba, and that's caused, of course, economic and political difficulties within Cuba at this time, and they need our solidarity more than ever. The Veterans for Peace has long opposed the U.S. economic blockade of Cuba, and we're coming back from Cuba now even more determined to educate people about it, because most people here don't know about the U.S. embargo. And when they hear about it, they immediately understand how unfair it is, and I think it's important for us to talk about that. So that's why the Cuban ambassador came to visit us, because they know we're doing that, and they want to encourage us to do more of that, and we will.
Well, there was a period where the Pastors for Peace were bringing supplies to Cuba. When I was getting threatened with going to jail for going to Cuba because I didn't go through the right authority, I went to William Kunstler's wife, who put me in touch with Ramsey Clark, who's a former Attorney General under LBJ, and he was on 12th Street, and he said, great, let them threaten you because we're going to use it as a test case to break the embargo. And then they completely backpedaled and didn't ever bother me again. But they were trying to break it.
just to let you know, we're gonna try to wrap it up in about 5 or 10 minutes. There's food downstairs. We invite everyone to continue conversation, but if you want to respond to that, but we'd like to take any 1 or 2 more other questions.
I would like to
Yes.
finish, because I had the bad news, good news thing, and then
Oh,
you do
okay.
the bad news.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to keep it much
Sure.
briefer than my earlier comments. One is, as a cultural thing, we got to see Cuban religions of African origin. We got to see a mosque, we got to see a cathedral, thank you. We got to see a synagogue. We got to attend, I'm Buddhist, we went to Buddhist New Year's prayer on the first day we got there. So I learned the day we got there that the State Department of the United States had added Cuba to a list of countries that do not permit free exercise of religion. And we're like, no. So I wrote a letter to the American president and sent it from Miami. And then more recently, a guy I met in Miami who's got government and military experience said, send me that in a JPEG form and we'll make sure it gets to policymakers, not just the desk where they say thank you for participating in our democracy. The last thing is the embargo. We made a press conference and we asked for the lifting of the embargo. But from an indigenous point of view, James Akau and myself are Hawaiians, I'm also part Chamorro. We looked at that crumbling infrastructure of early 1950s Cuban mass tourism, which ended with the revolution, and it reminds us of the current mass tourism in Hawaii. And just today I read an article that the Native Hawaiian Leadership Council is having its conference in Las Vegas because for the first time there are more Hawaiians living in Las Vegas than in Hawaii. And so we all said, yeah, we'd like to see the embargo lifted, but we also thought, be careful what you wish for, because we don't have an embargo in Hawaii, but we're being forced out by economic pressures. So that's something to